a very good relationship with President Xi. He's I find him to be a tremendous guy, and we get along well, and we're doing a lot of business with China and making a lot of money. He's been very nice about this. In all fairness, he gets like 60% of his oil from Hormuz, and I think he's been very respectful. We haven't been challenged by China. They don't challenge us, and he wouldn't do that.
President Trump discussing his upcoming trip to Beijing, the Iran conflict remaining top of mind as the president reportedly is pushing to end the conflict with Iran before he meets with Xi Jinping. Now, President Trump's visit follows the Iranian foreign minister's meeting with top Chinese diplomats earlier this week. China reportedly urging Iran to pursue diplomacy and avoid resuming hostilities as it seeks to position itself as a mediator in the conflict. Joining me now, Gatestone Institute senior fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, so China's foreign minister meeting with Montana Senator Steve Daines yesterday to put forward Beijing's top priorities ahead of next week. I want to get your thoughts on that, but I want to pivot back to this issue of the idea that China now sees itself as a mediator between Iran and the United States. I mean, there's several million barrels of oil of reasons there, but your thoughts?
Yeah, China really is not a honest broker or a mediator. It's a comrade in arms to Iran, supplying everything except for combat personnel. So we've got to understand China is on the other side. Now, that means it can help maybe persuade Iran to come to the table and negotiate. But, right at this point, I think we need to view the Chinese as they view themselves, as opposing the United States and hoping that we lose.
Do you still think that the president should go on the trip?
No, for a lot of reasons. But one of them, of course, is that this war is ongoing, and our commander-in-chief should not go to the capital of an enemy combatant. It's as simple as that.
All right. Let's talk about this oil issue then, because Beijing is ordering these Chinese firms to ignore U.S. sanctions tied to Iranian oil. This is something else that could come up next week, obviously, directly challenging Washington's crackdown ahead of the meeting between the two leaders. China's Commerce Ministry invoking a 2021 law which allows firms to not comply with foreign sanctions if it's deemed illegitimate. A Chinese-owned oil tanker also reportedly was attacked near the Strait of Hormuz for the first time since this conflict began. Gordon, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know why the Iranians would attack a Chinese tanker, and there are all sorts of theories about what's going on here. But, when you see this going on, this move by the Chinese Commerce Ministry to oppose imposition of U.S. sanctions, telling Chinese entities not to comply, well, that's challenging the United States, despite what President Trump said in the clip that you showed. So it is clearly President Trump's got to do something. If he doesn't, he looks like he's in an inferior position when he heads to Beijing next week. So, Trump is Trump, and he can change the tables and change everything overnight. And I hope that he does that, because I want him to walk into Beijing showing the Chinese that he's the one driving events, that China has to deal with him, and that the United States is the dominant party. And that's the only way that these talks can work out well.
Well, but there's also the issue of trade here, and that is something that Secretary Besson has repeatedly talked about. He's been laying that groundwork. I mean, he's been the face, along with Jameson Greer, who's going to be joining us in the 8 a.m. hour today on these U.S. China trade relations. So when the president goes over to China, that seems to be, to me, to be the kickoff to the talks. And that's where maybe China would be more amenable and maybe, I'd say, but push Iran aside a little bit to make sure that that trade relationship with the U.S. is actually finally fixed.
Yes, and China needs the U.S. market, because Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the basis of the Chinese economy. He's got to export more. He needs the U.S. market, 34% of global consumption, Americans. So, yeah, this is a place where I think President Trump can use a leverage against the Chinese. He absolutely needs to do something.
Yeah, I want to ask you about AI. Obviously, this is another big piece of this because the U.S. and China reportedly are weighing the launch of new guardrails to stop the rivalry of AI before it spirals out of control. A lot of guardrails in place would be maybe needed here, but the Wall Street Journal writes this: both countries recognize powerful AI models could trigger crises neither side is prepared to manage. I want to ask you about this, and also I want you to listen to Kevin Hassett. He joined Maria, and they spoke about this. Listen to this.
The Mythos model makes it so that vulnerabilities that we didn't know existed before could potentially be found with this more powerful tool, but we have scrambled on all the government effort and all the private sector to coordinate and to make sure that before this model is released out into the wild, that it's been tested left and right to make sure that it doesn't cause any harm to the American businesses or the American government. And we're studying possibly an executive order to give a clear roadmap to everybody about how this is going to go and how future AIs that also potentially create vulnerabilities should go through a process so that they're released in the wild after they've been proven safe, just like an FDA drug. And so I think that Mythos is the first of them, but it's incumbent on us to build a system so that AI can be the leader of AI, U.S. AI can be, and be safe at the same time. And that's really pretty much what we're working almost full time on right now.
And Gordon, that's the key point that he makes at the end there. He says that we want the U.S. to be the leader. We want to be at the forefront of AI. You don't want China to be at the forefront of AI because you've got people like Senator Bernie Sanders who were hosting Chinese officials in Washington.
Yes, and we have tried to talk to China about AI. The Biden administration put on an enormous effort, especially when Xi Jinping came to Woodside, California in November 2023. The Chinese just blew us off. Now, it would be nice to think that we could come to some agreement with China on guardrails, but the question is whether China would actually enforce them. I think the way out of this is that for the U.S. to become dominant in AI, and that it's U.S. researchers and technicians and politicians and leaders sort of creating those guardrails that the rest of the world follows because our AI is dominant. I think that's the only way we get out of this. Agreement with China is just not going to work. They're not going to comply. It's a trap. They want to prevent us from continuing our lead in AI. We shouldn't let the Chinese determine what we do.
As Maria says, replicate and replace. That's the Chinese motto. Gordon Chang, it's always great to speak with you, and we're going to be seeing you a lot more next week, a big week for these discussions between President Trump and Xi Jinping. Thank you for being here, Gordon.
Well, thank you, Cheryl.